My name is Alex Parker. I'm 32 years old, and on what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life, my father stood in front of over 100 people and slapped me across the face because I refused to give my little brother, his golden boy, my entire $60,000 wedding fund. Let that sink in. Not a private conversation, not an angry whisper behind closed doors, a full slap. In public. In the middle of my engagement party, just because I finally said no. And that one slap? It became the fuse that blew up everything he had built for 25 years. His business, his reputation, even his marriage. But before we get to the part where police walk into a fine dining restaurant mid-toast and my father's empire crumbles like stale bread, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And subscribe if you've ever had to break free from a toxic family narrative, especially one that insists loyalty means letting yourself be used. Because let me be clear, I didn't start this war, but I damn sure finished it. It was a Thursday evening. Summer in Seattle. Golden hour made everything look more perfect than it really was. The restaurant we'd rented, Silver Oak, was all candlelight, dark wood, and soft piano music. My fiancée, Emma, stood beside me, her hand in mine. She wore this deep blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes, and her smile could have lit up the city. I remember thinking, we made it. After years of grinding, saving, saying no to nights out, clipping coupons, taking freelance jobs on the side, we'd finally made it to this moment. Emma and I weren't flashy people. We both worked at Horizon Creative, a marketing firm in downtown Seattle, me on the design team, her in strategy. We'd met 4 years ago over a failed pitch and too many lattes. Our bond started in conference rooms, but grew on mountaintops and hiking trails and late-night brainstorming on our tiny kitchen table. We weren't just partners in love, we were partners in life design. And we had worked for every damn brick of that life. My best friend Jared, already a few drinks in, was holding court by the bar. I could hear his laugh from across the room. He's been my guy since freshman year. The friend who dragged me to parties when all I wanted to do was code, but also stayed up helping me study the night before finals. We now did freelance work together on the side websites, campaigns, whatever paid. When Emma's father, Dr. Chen, got up to give his toast, I nearly lost it. The man's a respected surgeon, sharp and stoic, but his words were warm, like he'd carved out space in his heart for me and wasn't afraid to show it. I've seen the way you support each other, he said. That's all a father can ask for. It wasn't just a toast, it was a balm. A kind of emotional validation I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. Then there was my family. They sat near the front, just a little too stiff, a little too formal. My mom, Diana, in a pearl-set cardigan, scanning the room like she was grading everyone's outfits. My dad, Richard, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, arms crossed, jaw tight, and my brother Marcus slouched, scrolling endlessly through his phone, like the party was a punishment. Typical. While I had worked night shifts in college kitchens, paid rent on ramen noodles, and fought tooth and nail for scholarships, Marcus had dropped out sophomore year to chase crypto dreams. He bought into a dozen sure things, burned through thousands of dollars, including a sizable chunk of my parents' retirement fund, and still, somehow, he was the favored one. He had charm, sure, that effortless, smirking, devil-may-care charisma that people mistake for confidence, but under it was recklessness and entitlement. When Marcus crashed and burned when he lost it all and needed bailing out, Dad handled it. No judgment, no consequences, just wired him more money. I remember one call from college. I was working 60-hour weeks at a greasy seafood restaurant. I had $112 in my bank account. I called home, hoping Mom might send a care package. Instead, she answered in a whisper, "Thank God you called. It's Marcus. He's struggling. The crypto thing didn't work out. He lost the money for his car payment too." I remember leaning against the fridge in the break room, apron still soaked in fish oil, and asking, "How much?" "Just a few thousand," she replied, "but your father already took care of it. Anyway, he's really down. You should call him. Cheer him up." I stared at the moldy tile floor and thought, he burns everything down, and I'm the one expected to clean the ashes and say thank you. That's who Marcus was. That's what my parents built, And that's the dynamic I'd been quietly fighting my whole life. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I let the digs slide, the comparisons, the way Dad would clap Marcus on the back and talk about potential while barely acknowledging my promotions. Because part of me, maybe the most broken part, still wanted their approval. Still hoped they'd look at me someday and say, "We're proud of you too." Back to the party. Everything was smooth until he stood up. Dad, glass in one hand, fork in the other. He tapped once, ding, cutting through the room like a blade. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, smiling with too many teeth. He gave some generic congratulations, eyes barely grazing mine. Then his tone changed. "And I have an important family announcement." I remember how my chest tightened. Emma's hand gripped mine a little harder. After careful consideration, he continued, "Diana and I have decided that Alex's $60,000 wedding fund will be given to his brother Marcus." The air disappeared. Like, literally vanished. I could hear nothing, just the sound of my pulse, a dull, thunderous roar in my ears. That fund was mine. It had been legally transferred into my name on my 21st birthday by my grandfather before he passed. I had saved every penny. It wasn't just a wedding fund, it was the seed for our future down payment on a home, emergency cushion, security. My voice cracked when I spoke, "Dad, that's not funny." He didn't blink. "This isn't a joke. Your brother needs it more than you do." I stood up, chair scraping the wood. "That money is mine, legally. Emma and I planned our life around it." And then my mother jumped in. "Don't be so selfish. Alex, Marcus's family. You've always had more." More, I nearly laughed. "I had more because I worked more. I sacrificed." "You always make it about you," my father snapped. And then, before I could say another word, he took 2 steps forward and slapped me. Hard. The sound was sharp, almost theatrical. I felt the burn before the pain, and the room gasped like it had collectively lost its breath. Emma screamed my name. Jared stood up, fists clenched. My cheek stung, but the humiliation ran deeper, and in that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't flinch, I just looked my father in the eye and whispered, "You're about to get a surprise you'll never forget." He scoffed, arrogant, smug. But then the double-glass doors of Silver Oak swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. Let me take you back before the slap, before the officers stepped in, before my father publicly tried to rewrite my future like he owned the copyright on my life. Because that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the final blow in a long, slow demolition of everything I'd tried to build on my own. See, when you grow up in a house where love is conditional, you learn to measure every smile, every compliment, every "I'm proud of you" like a stock price volatile, strategic, and never freely given. My childhood wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet in the worst ways, the kind of quiet where achievements were expected but never celebrated, where failure was weaponized against you but only if you weren't the golden child. And Marcus, he was golden from day one. He was charming in that slippery way that makes people lean in while he's already halfway out the door. Teachers forgave his late homework. Coaches turned a blind eye to his arrogance. He had that grin full of promise and zero responsibility. Me, I was the kid who color-coded his planner and laminated his SAT schedule. When I got a full scholarship to college, my dad's reaction was, "Well, it better be a good ROI." When Marcus got arrested for trying to throw a crypto launch party in someone else's foreclosed Airbnb, Dad bailed him out before the ink was dry on the citation. And somehow, I was always the one being told to do better. One summer during college, I was working double shifts at a seafood place that smelled like regret and old grease. The AC was busted, and my shoes never stopped squeaking from the fryer oil. That week, I had $112 in my bank account and a paper due at midnight. Mom called me in a panic. "It's Marcus." She said, "He's devastated. He put your father's investment into a coin that tanked overnight." "How much did he lose?" I asked, pressing my phone between my shoulder and ear while flipping frozen shrimp onto a sizzling tray. "Just a few thousand," she whispered. "But Alex, your dad's handling it. What matters is Marcus is feeling low. I think you should call him. Let him know he's still supported." I stared into the fryer, boiling with more than just oil. That moment stuck with me. It branded itself into my spine. I was burning my youth to light my own path. He was lighting money on fire and being coddled for the smoke. And it wasn't just money, it was space. Every holiday, the seating chart was organized around Marcus. Every conversation somehow rerouted back to his potential, his latest idea, his vague startup concepts that went nowhere. Meanwhile, when I told my parents Emma and I were planning to buy a house, my mother said, "Isn't that a bit ambitious for someone in marketing?" Like owning a home should be reserved for people who deserve it in their eyes. People like Marcus who hadn't held a steady job in 3 years, but always showed up in designer sneakers and a Tesla he couldn't afford. But this wasn't about envy. This was about value, and how mine had always been discounted at birth. Emma saw it. She never said much, but she knew. She saw how I flinched every time my father asked Marcus about next steps, but didn't ask me a single question about our business. She saw how my mom subtly rolled her eyes when I mentioned a work win. And Emma, she never looked away from it. One night, about 6 months before the engagement party, she asked gently, "Why do you still try with them?" I shrugged, staring at the ceiling. "Because if I don't, I'm afraid I'll never get the version of a family I wanted." Emma didn't say anything. She just reached over and took my hand. By the time our engagement party rolled around, I was already bracing myself for some kind of discomfort, but I had no idea the grenade was coming from the inside. Let me tell you about the venue. Silver oak wasn't cheap, but we chose it for the warmth. It had character dark wood beams, dim lighting, and this almost cinematic feel that made you believe good things were possible. We filled that space with our people, our real people. Jared was there, already joking with the bartender like he owned the place. Dr. and Mrs. Chen, Emma's parents, greeted guests with the ease of people who didn't feel the need to perform. My old college mentor, Professor Williams, even made the 3-hour drive up just to be there. I looked around and thought, this is the family I chose. Not the one I was born into, but the one I earned. Which made it all the more jarring when my actual family walked in. They were late, of course. My father marched in like he was the keynote speaker at a Fortune 500 conference. Mom followed a few steps behind, still adjusting her earrings. And Marcus? He strolled in like a celebrity caught off guard by paparazzi hoodie, smirk, phone in hand. The atmosphere shifted, not in a dramatic way, but like the room noticed. You could feel people wondering, who invited the audit department? We kept it civil. I walked over, hugged them, introduced them to Emma's parents. "Nice to meet you," Dr. Chen said politely. My father gave him a once-over and replied, "You're the surgeon, right? Good hands must run in the family." Was it a compliment and insult both? Classic Richard Parker. Emma tried. She made polite conversation with my mom about flower arrangements. Mom blinked slowly and said, "I suppose hydrangeas are okay if you're not doing a real wedding." That was the first cut of the night. It got worse over dinner. My mom leaned over and whispered, "Lily Chen's daughter had a 4-tier cake. Are you planning anything more grown up?" My dad clapped Marcus on the shoulder and said, "I told you crypto would bounce back, just need the right timing. Son." Marcus raised his glass and said, "Don't worry, old man, my next venture's airtight. Real estate meets AI. It's called proper intelligence." Jared nearly choked on his wine. I focused on my plate, knowing that tonight wasn't about winning small battles, it was about showing Emma and everyone else that I could rise above it. I didn't know I was about to be ambushed. Because as the room quieted for toasts and the waiter dimmed the lights, and Emma turned to me with this radiant smile, my father stood up. He tapped his fork to his glass, ding, and dropped the bomb. After careful consideration, Diana and I have decided that Alex's wedding fund will be given to Marcus. The gasp didn't just come from me. It came from everyone, like the entire room exhaled wrong. Emma's hand tightened around mine. Jared stood bolt upright. Even Professor Williams looked like someone had unplugged his spine. I want to say I handled it with grace, but honestly, it felt like the earth cracked. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about money, it was about permission. My father stood there, in front of my chosen family, and announced that what I had earned, what I had sacrificed years for, was no longer mine. And all because I wouldn't fall back in line. He didn't know I'd already filed a legal protection order on the account, He didn't know Emma and I had spoken to a financial advisor. He didn't know the police were waiting outside with a copy of the signed affidavit. Because I wasn't going to let him win this time. The sting of the slap faded faster than the silence that followed. You ever been in a room where the air itself feels guilty? That's what it felt like. Every breath after that smack felt like it had to tiptoe. People didn't even whisper. No one moved. Emma's hand was frozen mid-air, like she wasn't sure if she should grab me or steady herself. And my father, Richard Parker, just stood there, hands still halfway in the air, as if he was posing for a statue of authority. Smug, controlled, a man who'd gotten away with so many manipulations that he believed this moment would pass too. But then the doors opened. 2 Seattle PD officers stepped through the velvet curtain with slow, deliberate steps. You could hear the shift. Forks clinked down, glasses paused mid-sip. My father turned toward them with mild annoyance, the way you'd react to a waiter interrupting the punchline of your story. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. "If this is about parking, I'm sure it can wait." The taller officer looked straight at me. "Bow, Alex Parker." I nodded, my voice calm. "That's me." He gave a small smile, almost imperceptible. "We're here regarding a formal notice of contested ownership and potential financial misappropriation. We'd like to speak with Mr. Richard Parker." The entire room inhaled at once. My father's smile broke. Just a twitch at first, but to someone who had studied his face for 30 years, it was seismic. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, adjusting his cuffs like they were armor. "My son's obviously confused. This is a private family issue." "It's a filed complaint." The officer cut in, accompanied by notarized documents and a signed affidavit from the financial institution involved. He froze. That was the first crack in his illusion of control. What no one knew, not even Emma, was that 2 weeks earlier, I'd started preparing. After a tense phone call with my mother where she hinted that certain family assets might need to be shared fairly, I'd driven straight to Jared's place. Jared wasn't just my best friend. He was a quiet genius with a minor in pre-law and a knack for contracts. He was the one who said, "You need to legally lock that fund down, now." So we did. We contacted a lawyer from his network, filed protective ownership documents, and left a copy with the bank and another with Emma's mentor, Professor Williams, who agreed to hold it in trust. I didn't want to think my father would go that far, but I'd seen too many warnings in his eyes. And the truth is, when a man like Richard Parker believes he owns you, your money isn't really yours unless it's armed. Back to the restaurant. "Sir," one of the officers said, "we're not placing you under arrest, but we are formally notifying you of the financial injunction. Any transfer or use of the wedding fund will be treated as a breach." My father looked directly at me, and for the first time, he looked unsure. "Are you seriously doing this?" he whispered. I met his eyes. "You already did it. I'm just not letting you finish." The rest of the night unraveled like a badly written drama. My mother stood up in a fury, voice trembling. "You brought the police to a family celebration? You're humiliating us in front of strangers?" Emma stepped forward, calm but steel-spined. "No, you humiliated yourselves the moment you announced stealing from your own son." That's when my father lost his composure. "I gave you everything," he barked. "This job, your name, your future. Without me, you'd be nothing." And there it was, the truth, stripped of charm, the belief that I was just a product of his resources, his branding, that I'd never built anything on my own. I paid for college with scholarships. I said evenly, "I've worked every year since I was 16. You never once paid my rent. You never once even offered." He sputtered, "Because I was preparing you. Because Marcus needed more." "No," I said, my voice rising. "Marcus needed consequences, and you made sure he never had any." That was the real betrayal, not the money, not the slap, but the years I spent trying to earn respect in a rigged game. Everyone watched, stunned. As Emma took the mic the DJ had left behind and calmly said, "This event is over. Please feel free to take some dessert for the road. And for those wondering, yes, we'll still be getting married, just not with dirty money." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Even Dr. Chen nodded. As the guests dispersed, some offered quiet words of support. A few, including Jared, stayed to help Emma gather our things. But my parents, they stormed out in silence. Marcus hung back a few moments longer. He looked at me with something between confusion and rage. "You didn't have to go nuclear," he muttered. I stared at him. "You didn't have to be a leech." "Dad's not going to forget this," he warned. I nodded. "Neither will I." That night, back in our apartment, I sat with a bag of ice against my face. The sting had dulled, but the pressure behind my eyes hadn't. Emma curled up beside me on the couch, silent for a while, then she said something that changed everything. "You know this isn't over, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I know." "Then you need to decide something." She said, "Do you want to just protect yourself or do you want to expose him?" I turned to her. And that's when the shift really happened, because protecting myself, that was a defensive move, a survival instinct. But exposing him, that meant finally standing up for the kid I used to be, the one who believed if you worked hard enough, one day they'd clap for him too. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder marked Black Swan, the name Jared and I jokingly gave to the contingency plan. Inside it were copies of bank statements, screenshots of email correspondences, and a video recording of a meeting Marcus had accidentally streamed on Twitch months ago where he bragged that Dad will cover any risk. It's basically his job at this point. I had everything I needed. But I wanted one last piece before I pulled the trigger. I needed proof that Richard Parker had knowingly tried to take what wasn't his. Despite legal warnings, I needed the bank call. So the next morning, I requested a call transcript from our financial rep. And what I heard confirmed everything. "Mr. Parker," the bank manager had said, "I must remind you, the account in question is legally secured in your son's name, Boshua as we cannot all." Richard cut him off. "You'll do it," he said, "or I'll take my investments elsewhere." That was it, the nail. The empire was cracking, and I was about to start driving the wedge. The moment I heard my father threaten the bank manager on that recorded call, I knew something had changed inside me permanently. It wasn't rage. Rage was loud, sharp, hot. This was colder, cleaner, like the part of me that still craved his approval had finally flatlined. I didn't want an apology anymore. I wanted closure, the kind you carve out for yourself when no one else offers it. Emma sat beside me on the couch, legs tucked under her, laptop open, face unreadable. I played the recording again. "You'll do it," my father said on the tape, "or I'll take my investments elsewhere." Emma reached over and stopped the playback. "Okay," she said softly, "that's enough." But it wasn't, not for me. He knew. I muttered. He knew it was legally mine, and he tried anyway. Tried to use leverage, threaten the manager, like I was a bad investment. "You're not," Emma said. "You're the first person in your family who ever returned more than what was given." That's when the idea solidified. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to dismantle the machine that made it seem like I never owned it to begin with. That meant going after Richard Parker's image, his untouchable legacy, his ironclad reputation as the visionary founder of Parker & Sloan Holdings, the man on the cover of Northwest Business Monthly 3 years ago, the keynote speaker at countless investor events. And trust me, nobody climbs that high without cutting a few corners or bodies. I started where it hurt his name. Parker & Sloan wasn't just his company, it was his second wife, his altar, his mirror. He didn't just own it, he was it, which made it the perfect battleground. First, I called Jared. "You still have access to SEC filings?" I asked. "Yep, want me to poke around Daddy's empire?" I smiled grimly. "More than poke. Start with Parker & Sloan's board structure, then look at shell partnerships. I want to know who's real and who's just a friendly signature." "I'm on it," Jared said. "Oh, and guess what Professor Williams just called me back? He knows someone at the Seattle Ledger, an investigative journalist." That was our first real break. Meet Lena McNeil. Pulitzer finalist, sharp jaw, sharper questions, spoken bullet points. When she met me at a cafe downtown, she was already flipping through a printed dossier. Jared sent over a few things. She said, "Enough smoke to justify a sniff, but if you want a fire, I need more." So I gave her everything. The bank recordings, emails from Marcus bragging about Dad's private pipeline, old contracts where Parker & Sloan funneled consulting fees to dormant LLC's shell companies registered to my uncle who didn't even own a computer. Lena scribbled notes as I talked. "Your father's a quiet operator," she said, "respected, untouched. That's why this could matter. But going public wasn't the first strike. First, we needed internal pressure, doubt, discomfort, instability. So I contacted Peter Songdad's former CFO, who'd resigned suddenly 2 years ago with no press. He picked up on the second ring. "Alex, it's been a while." "I know," I said, "but I'm not calling to catch up. I'm calling because I think what made you leave Parker and Sloan is happening again." There was a long pause. Then Peter exhaled. "I figured it would. That company's a house of cards." I explained what I had, the bank call, the journalist, the affidavit. He didn't even hesitate. "Send me everything," he said. "I've kept a backup of the 2019 audit, never signed off on it for a reason." That audit would become our smoking gun. Meanwhile, Emma worked quietly on her end. She reached out to her firm's legal advisor, a no-nonsense attorney named Clarice who specialized in corporate governance. "Tell her to check Parker and Sloan's use of pension funds." Emma said one night, "I have a feeling your dad's been borrowing from one pot to fill another." She was right. Clarice flagged 2 irregularities that Lena later confirmed through a source inside the company. It was a game of dominoes. Not one big scandal, but enough shady practices linked together to raise questions. Enough to turn confidence into curiosity, and curiosity into fear. But we weren't ready to go public yet. Because I had one last card to play, something symbolic, something personal. Remember that USB drive? It was black, no logo, no markings, just a tiny flash drive I'd kept in my desk for years. It held 3 things. A scanned copy of my grandfather's original wedding fund letter, handwritten. The updated contract Jared helped me file, cementing the fund's ownership. A video message from me. Not a rage-filled rant, just a quiet, direct statement. I recorded it the night after the slap. In it, I said, "I spent most of my life thinking I had to earn my family's respect. But respect built on obedience isn't real, it's control. And I'm done letting shame wear my name." I handed the USB to Lena. She nodded like she already knew what to do with it. 2 weeks later, the article dropped. "The house Parker built shaky foundations at a Seattle giant." Front page of the Ledger, accompanied by a video montage, my message, a redacted audit, and Marcus laughing about family money being like Monopoly cash. Social media exploded. Investors panicked. Parker and Sloan's stock took a 12% dive in 2 days. Dad released a statement calling the claims false, malicious, and motivated by personal bitterness. But it didn't matter. A board meeting was called. Emergency review triggered. SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. That same night, I got a text from Marcus. "You went too far. They're talking about criminal charges." I didn't respond. Because here's the thing, I didn't destroy my family. They built a throne on sand and demanded I kneel on it. All I did was turn on the light. When I was a kid, I used to build elaborate domino trails across the living room floor. I'd spend hours setting them up one tiny block at a time, only to knock them down with a single flick. That's what this next phase felt like. Except this time, the dominoes were legal filings, anonymous tips, and decades of quiet resentment. And the flick that was mine. The public takedown hurt my father's image, but it didn't touch his grip. Richard Parker was still clinging to control like a dying man clutches air aggressively, selfishly, and without shame. If I wanted real accountability, I had to go deeper, inside the bones of his power. Parker and Sloan was in damage control mode. Their PR team issued daily statements. Lawyers fired off cease and desist letters like confetti. And my father booked interviews trying to rebrand himself as the victim of a malicious vendetta by a disgruntled family member. But what he didn't know, what he never bothered to consider, was how many people he'd stepped on to get there. I didn't just have allies, I had witnesses. Clarice, Emma's legal contact, identified 3 former employees with NDAs tied to suspicious severance exits. Jared dug deeper and confirmed one of them had been let go right after raising concerns about improper asset movement. Their names: Lisa Vargas, Tyrell King, an intern named Chloe Dean who had disappeared from the company's website overnight 2 years ago. And here's where it gets poetic. Chloe, she was now working as a digital archivist for the Washington State Ethics Bureau. I reached out. The meeting took place in a library basement, of all places. Fluorescent lighting, the smell of old paper, And Chloe, now 26, sharper than ever, stood across from me holding a file. I saw the article. She said quietly, "I've been waiting for someone to come forward." She slid the file across the table. Inside were internal memos, screenshots, a PDF labeled Red List Q4. "Red List?" I asked. Chloe nodded grimly. "It's how your father referred to whistleblowers. If your name made it on here, you were either reassigned, discredited, or bought out." My hands clenched the folder. There it was, written in corporate font but stained with years of rot, proof that the empire had always been rigged. Meanwhile, Lena, our journalist, was preparing her follow-up piece. She wanted more than numbers this time. She wanted people. Real voices, real scars. And slowly, they came forward one by one. Tyrell admitted he'd seen Richard manipulate minority-owned vendors into silent partnerships, just to gain diversity points during government bidding rounds. Lisa shared emails where she was told to stay sweet and silent after catching a discrepancy in quarterly reports. They had receipts, they had timelines, and more importantly, they had nothing left to lose. We bundled everything into a digital dossier. Lena called it inheritance of control. But before she published, I had one last thread to pull. Marcus. I hadn't spoken to him since the night of the party. His last message was a threat disguised as a warning, but something about his silence since the fallout made me curious. So I called him. He picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. "Is this about your crusade again?" he muttered. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's about you saving your own skin." That got his attention. We met in a parking lot behind a gym he never used but always name-dropped. He looked worse than I expected. Puffy face, dark circles, Rolex still on wrist like the costume hadn't gotten the memo the actor was out of lines. "You look like hell," I said. "Screw you," he replied. "You blew up our lives." I leaned against my car. "No, I blew up his narrative. Yours is still salvageable." He scoffed. "Why would I help you?" "Because I know you," I said. "You don't want jail. You want options. You want to be able to say, 'I saw it coming.' You can either go down with him or step out while you still can." He didn't answer. But the next morning, a flash drive arrived in my inbox. No note, no signature. Just one folder, 2018 Dad became in. Inside spreadsheets, emails, a scanned passport page. Marcus, whether by guilt or self-preservation, had handed me the kill shot. The final blow wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. Clarice filed a petition for an ethics review by the Department of Financial Institutions. Jared submitted the Cayman documents to the IRS whistleblower program. And Lena. She released the second article. Silencing the Red List. The hidden engine behind Parker and Sloan. It went viral. This time, there was no recovery plan. The board called for a vote. Emergency hearing. Richard Parker was removed as CEO in a 6-1 decision. The one vote in his favor, his old golf buddy, retired the next day. My father didn't speak publicly. Not that week, not the next. But behind closed doors, I knew he was scrambling, trying to understand how the kid he thought he could slap into submission had burned down his throne with nothing but paper, truth, and timing. Emma and I watched the vote tally on her iPad, curled on the couch just like the night of the slap. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. But I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. I felt released, like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for 3 decades. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Because I'd taken his image, his influence, his seat at the table. But I hadn't taken his voice. Not yet. And Richard Parker. He was never the type to go quietly. The envelope was thick, expensive, and smelled faintly of cedar. My name was embossed on the front, Alex Parker. No middle initial, no return address, just a wax seal pressed into the back flap, classy, deliberate, like a challenge dressed as tradition. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to an exclusive Parker and Sloan legacy dinner to honor those who shaped its future. No RSVP, just a date, time, and the location, a private ballroom at the Marrow, Seattle's most elite, members-only club." I held the card in my hand like it was ticking. Emma read it over my shoulder. "He's staging a comeback." "Or a burial," I said. "For me?" A week later, I walked into the Marrow with a suit I didn't buy and a calm I didn't quite trust. The place looked like old money had married quiet arrogance and had tasteful children. Dark mahogany walls, oil paintings of Pacific Northwest landscapes, and a chandelier big enough to bankrupt a small town. Inside, about 24 guests mingled with wine glasses and curated laughter. I recognized investors, former board members, and a few community leaders who'd stayed neutral during the fallout. And then, like gravity re-entered the room, he appeared, Richard Parker, my father. He looked smaller, not physically, but something in the way he carried himself, like the weight of being the man had shifted, like he knew the throne he once sat on now had splinters. Still, he smiled that patented, press-ready smile. "Alex," he said, arms wide, "glad you came." For a second, the world paused. Because some deep part of me, some foolish, child-shaped part, still hoped he'd say the words I never got. "You were right, I'm sorry." But of course, he didn't. Instead, he handed me a glass of scotch and motioned toward the main table. There, engraved into polished brass, was a new plaque. "Legacy is not what we inherit, it's what we rebuild." His voice dropped beside me, like I wrote that line myself. I turned to him. "Legacy built on stolen bricks doesn't age well." He smiled wider. And yet, here we are. Dinner began. Speeches, applause, carefully worded acknowledgments. A guest from the state chamber praised Richard's resilience in the face of unfounded adversity. I felt my jaw tighten. Then, midway through dessert, Richard stood. He tapped his glass, and the room hushed like a courtroom. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, voice smooth as ever. "This past season has tested not just my character, but the fabric of what we built together." He glanced at me not directly, but just enough. "And while some chose to focus on division, tonight is about unity, the future, a renewed Parker and Sloan." Applause. Not thunderous, but enough. Then he looked straight at me. "And I'm proud to say," he continued, "that my son, Alex, has agreed to rejoin the advisory board, bringing with him new ideas. And yes, new perspectives that challenge us to grow." Wait. What? People turned, smiled, nodded at me like I was some reformed rebel coming home. Emma looked confused. Even Jared, seated near the back, blinked twice. I stood slowly. "I'm sorry," I said loud enough for every fork to pause. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The room tensed. "I'm not here to join anything. I'm here to witness how far my father will go to repaint the truth with half-truths." I pulled out my phone, tapped once, and held it up. Behind me, a portable projector flicked on. On the wall flashed an email thread. Subject line: Event Coordination PR Redemption Pitch. From Richard at parkerholdings.com to Sloan Strategies PR@gmail.com. Frame Alex's presence as reconciliation. Use buzzwords: unity, vision, rebuilding. He'll show up for optics. He won't fight in public. He's too polished now. Gasps. Then a second slide. A calendar invite titled Post-Dinner Damage Control Strategy Call. Date: the next morning. Silence broke like glass. Richard's mask faltered, just for a beat. Then he stepped forward, voice lower. "This is beneath you," he hissed, "dragging this into a public space." "No," I said. "What's beneath me is pretending this room is a temple when it's really just a laundromat for reputations." I turned to the guests. "You want the truth? I never agreed to anything. I came because I knew this was a show. I just decided to write the final act." It was over. Not with a fist, but with receipts. The room slowly emptied. Some shook my hand, others avoided eye contact. My father. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, eyes cast downward like a man who built a mirror and finally saw through it. Later that night, back home, I found something waiting in my inbox. An unsigned document. Resignation. Richard M. Parker, effective immediately. I withdraw from all positions within Parker and Sloan Holdings and release all familial claims. Attached was a one-line email. "You win. Enjoy the ashes." I stared at it for a long time, then hit reply. There's nothing to enjoy about ashes, but at least now I can start planting. The next morning, I held the old USB stick in my hand again. The same one from the beginning. The one with Grandpa's note. I walked it to a small tech vault Jared helped me set up, placed it inside, locked it. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the dinner, since the last public gasp of Richard Parker's empire. 6 months of silence from his end. No headlines, no lawsuits, no mysterious press releases. He disappeared from the speaking circuits, the boardrooms, the golf club interviews. Even Marcus had gone radio silent, retreating into whatever penthouse corner guilt couldn't reach. And me, I didn't rebuild Parker and Sloan. I didn't want it. I built something else. It started small, just a fund. A real one this time, structured transparently, no shell games, no inheritance drama. The Parker Reform Initiative. Name intentional. Legacy reclaimed. We focused on corporate ethics, whistleblower protections, and support for young professionals navigating toxic family businesses. Emma and I co-founded it with Jared and Clarice advising. Chloe joined too, because who better to protect others than someone who survived it herself? Funny how the broken pieces of my past ended up forming the foundation of something solid. And yeah, my dad hated that name. But the name wasn't for him. It was for people like me who needed a mirror they could walk toward, not away from. Then came the letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, thick paper, blue ink, shaky handwriting. Alex, you were right. I thought I was protecting our legacy, but really, I was hiding inside it. You didn't destroy what I built. You revealed it. You gave the world the version of me I was too afraid to be accountable. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I hope you'll believe this. I see you now. Dad? I read it once. Then again. Then I put it down, not with anger, but something like quiet. No fanfare, no swelling music, just the final chapter written in trembling pen strokes from a man who finally dropped the mask even if it was too late to change the ending. Did it fix anything? No. But it named the damage. And sometimes, naming something is the first mercy you offer yourself. One night, Emma and I stood on our apartment balcony, Seattle lights flickering below us like nervous stars. She looked at me, then out at the city. You still feel angry? She asked. I took a deep breath. No, just clear. I held her hand and thought of all the things I didn't carry anymore. His voice in my head. That night at the engagement. The need to prove anything to anyone but myself. And suddenly, I felt something new. A silence that wasn't absence. A silence that felt earned. But the real twist came later. A small package arrived at our office. No return address. Inside a silver key and a short note. Not all vaults hold money. Sometimes they hold what matters more. The key was old, heavy, labeled Cedar Ridge, B3. Jared traced it back to a private storage facility in Yakima where my grandfather had lived during the last years of his life, the one who started the original wedding fund. We drove up together, Emma, Jared, and I. Unit B3 was small, dusty, smelled like cedar and rust. Inside was a single safe. Inside the safe, a sealed box. And inside that box, photos, letters, a journal, all from my grandfather. Letters addressed to my dad, never opened. A journal chronicling his regrets, how he'd watched my father grow colder, harder, more performative. And one letter addressed to me, Alex. If you're reading this, then the truth has found its way through the noise. I always hoped you'd be the one to break the pattern, not to destroy but to reimagine. Your father had strength but not softness. You have both. Remember, legacy isn't what we leave, it's what we teach before we go. Be the voice they can follow when the money disappears. Grandpa M. I closed the letter with shaking hands. Emma touched my back, and for a moment, I felt something crack open. Not grief, not vengeance. Gratitude. Because somehow, despite all of it, something good had survived. A message that traveled decades just to arrive in the hands of someone finally ready to read it. So, what's the lesson? That family is complicated. That justice takes time. Maybe. But if you ask me, it's this. You don't have to become the worst parts of where you come from. You can choose again, choose differently. Even if it hurts, even if no one claps, even if the only person who ever sees your full truth is you. My name is Alex Parker, and I wasn't the heir to an empire. I was the interruption in its echo. Story 2. My name is Sarah Whitman. I'm 33 years old, live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, and I make a comfortable, if unglamorous, living as a senior claims analyst for a regional insurance company. But none of that matters right now. Because 2 weeks ago, during Thanksgiving dinner, my younger sister slid a crisp legal document across our mother's antique oak dining table right next to the cranberry sauce and said, with her signature saccharine smile, "I just don't think we should pretend this is equal when it's clearly not." She was talking about our father's will, his estate, our inheritance. And by we, she meant me. So if you've ever had a family member look you in the eye and tell you you're not enough, not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not shiny enough to deserve what's rightfully yours, you're in the right place. Like this video if you've ever had to fight for basic respect, comment if someone's ever tried to redefine fairness in their favor, and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. It was our first Thanksgiving without Dad. He died in August pancreatic cancer. Fast, brutal, and if I'm being honest, we were all still in pieces. Dad was complicated, not perfect, but he had this quiet presence. Like the weight in the room shifted when he walked in. He was the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets without being asked, who always made the turkey too dry, who told the same bad jokes every year and we'd groan, every single time, and secretly miss it when he skipped one. Mom Margaret is tough as nails but was barely holding it together. I'd offered to host Thanksgiving this year. Keep it small, easy, but she insisted it'll feel normal if we do it at the house. The house, the one Dad grew up in, the one with creaky floorboards, shelves lined with too many ceramic angels, and a piano no one's touched since Jessica quit lessons at 12. I got there early, like always. I wanted to help, but also, I didn't want Mom to be alone too long with her grief. When I walked into the kitchen, the smell of sage and onions and something slightly burnt hit me like a wall. She had every burner going. She was wearing the yellow apron I got her for Mother's Day 3 years ago. Her hands trembled a little when she handed me a peeler. "Mashed potatoes," she said, "and gravy, if you can manage it." She didn't say it, but I could feel it. She was holding back tears by focusing on the stuffing. We cooked in near silence, the kind that's familiar, even comforting. I fell into the rhythm of it. Peel, chop, stir. For a brief moment, it felt like something close to peace. Then, right on cue, the front door opened, and she arrived. Jessica Whitman, 31, realtor, Miami-based, arrived wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my last month's rent and boots that had clearly never touched a sidewalk. Her hair curled just enough to look effortless, her makeup flawless. She looked like a Thanksgiving ad for some luxury brand that doesn't sell to people like me. "Smells intense," she said, wrinkling her nose like the scent of roasted turkey was offensive. "Hi to you too," I mumbled. She air-kissed Mom, gave me the kind of hug that says, "We're only doing this for appearances," and flounced into the living room. Mom's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Set the table," she asked. Jessica recoiled slightly. "Mom, I'm not really the domestic type." She gestured at her outfit. "This is silk." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. "Sarah can do it later," Mom said quickly, always the peacemaker. "Why don't you tell me about your big client meeting?" And just like that, Jessica launched into a monologue about how she was about to close a 7-figure property deal with a professional athlete whose name she definitely didn't need to mention. I tuned her out, focused on whisking gravy that wouldn't quite thicken, wondered if she ever noticed the way she sucked all the air out of a room. We sat down to eat around 4. The table looked thinner somehow. Dad's chair at the head felt wrong with no one in it. So Mom sat there, her eyes already glassy. Jessica cut her turkey into perfect little cubes. I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate. The conversation was strained. Jessica carried most of it, updating us on her personal brand strategy, dropping names like breadcrumbs. I was halfway through a second roll when she dropped the bomb. "So," she said, placing her fork down neatly, "about Dad's will." Just like that. My heart dropped. Mom stiffened. "Jess, maybe not tonight." But Jessica smiled sweetly. Why not? Sarah's here, we're all here, let's just clear the air. Clear the air, like this was a matter of Febreze, not family legacy. She reached into her handbag, a designer one with gold hardware I'd seen her show off on Instagram, and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the table. It landed next to the gravy boat. I stared at it, pulse pounding. I had a copy made. She said, "Dad's estate is being split evenly," which, in theory, is fair. But let's be honest. Are we really equals? I blinked. What the hell does that mean? She laughed lightly, like it was all a joke. "Oh, come on, Sarah, you're comfortable. You live a nice little life. But I have expenses, a mortgage, clients to impress, a future family to plan for." She said comfortable like it was a slur. "I'm just saying maybe we could adjust things a little, make it more equitable." Equitable, as if fairness was a sliding scale that tilted in her favor. I opened my mouth to argue, but my hands were shaking. Mom sat frozen, eyes darting between us. She looked tired, like she didn't have the strength to referee. Jessica took my silence as permission. "Just think about it. Sarah, you don't really need it, do you?" That was when I realized this wasn't about money. Not really. This was about value, about who counted more, about who was worth more. And in Jessica's world, that had never been me. I stood up slowly, my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Jessica raised an eyebrow, going somewhere. I didn't answer. I walked to the hallway, hands numb, heart pounding. I needed air, I needed anything but this. But what stopped me cold was the sight of the family photo on the hallway shelf. Me and Jessica, 1998, both of us in matching denim overalls, holding hands, smiling. I don't remember that day, I barely remember that girl. But something in me cracked. And right then, Gravy Boat, Will, and all I made a decision. I wasn't letting my sister rewrite what Dad left us. I wasn't giving her another inch, and I wasn't going to fight her the way she expected. No, I was going to beat her quietly. On my terms. And I already knew the first move. I didn't go back to the table, not right away. Instead, I stood there in the hallway, staring at that old photo like it had answers. Me and Jessica, 10 and 8, bangs too short, missing teeth, arms linked like we were inseparable. I tried to remember what it felt like being close to her, before the world taught her that sparkle mattered more than sincerity, before she started treating love like a transaction. But memory's tricky, it erases warmth and sharpens betrayal. The smell of turkey and baked apples lingered behind me, but it didn't comfort me, not anymore. That meal wasn't a tribute to Dad, it was a platform for Jessica's ambition, a stage she built on grief. I took a shaky breath, ran a hand down the hallway wall until I found the small nick in the paint Dad had made it when he moved the piano, cussed under his breath and said, "We'll patch it later." We never did. I turned, walked back into the dining room. Jessica was laughing at something on her phone. Mom sat stiff, her fork untouched. The envelope still sat there like a loaded weapon, untouched and deliberate. "Everything okay?" Jessica asked, eyes scanning me like she was measuring how much fight I had left. "Fine," I said, "just needed a moment." I sat, reached for my water, my hand barely shook. Inside, I was a storm, but I'd learned long ago how to look calm while drowning. You want to know when that started? It was always Jessica, always the shiny one. She had the curls, the dimples, the laugh that made strangers turn. Teachers loved her. Neighbors praised her. At church, the women called her a little star. I was the good one, the helper, the quiet girl who never complained, never asked for more than she was given. At 12, I made straight A's. Jessica got a C in math and still got ice cream. At 15, I skipped prom to tutor a girl from our school who was 2 grades behind. Jessica got a new dress for her junior formal and didn't even thank Mom. At 17, I applied to colleges with no help. Jessica threw a tantrum when she didn't get into her dream school, and Dad paid for a private coach to get her into her second choice. I swallowed it all, every micro injustice, every time someone told me, "You're so mature for your age," like it was a compliment and not a warning. "Don't expect attention. You're the steady one." Even Dad, for all his love, had a blind spot. "I don't worry about you," he used to say, sipping coffee while Jessica shouted from another room, "You're solid. Sarah, rock steady." You know what happens to rocks? They get leaned on until they crack. So when Jessica said, "We're not equals," it wasn't new, it was just the loudest she'd ever said it. The twisted part, she truly believed she deserved more, because she made more, spent more, needed more. In her world, value was visible. A house in Miami, social media followers, brand partnerships. Meanwhile, my world, deadlines, spreadsheets, homemade soup in mason jars, was invisible. But here's the thing. I knew Dad didn't see it that way. He wrote that will himself, carefully, during his last months, split everything 50-50, house, investments, even the life insurance. Because I raised you both, he told me once, when Jessica was in Miami and he thought I wasn't listening, and fairness is the last thing I can give you. I remember that. I held on to that. So no, I wasn't about to let Jessica erase his final act of love because it didn't match her idea of fairness. But I also wasn't going to stoop to her level. That night, after I got home, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, scrolled past emails, and stared at a blank document. Then I picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't talked to in years. "Lisa Chang," she answered, voice smooth, professional. "Lisa, it's Sarah Whitman from Emory." There was a pause, then, "Sarah. Oh, wow, it's been forever." We hadn't spoken since college, but I remembered she'd gone into estate law. Now she was a partner at a mid-size firm in Atlanta. I told her everything, the dinner, the envelope, the equitable comment. Lisa didn't interrupt, she just listened. When I finished, she said, "First off, what she did was emotionally manipulative, and possibly coercive depending on what she planned to follow up with." "Coercive?" I asked. "If she pressures you to sign anything, or if she suggests changing the will under duress, it could count." "I haven't signed anything, but..." "She's relentless." "Then record her. Next time. Even if it's just her talking about it. Some states don't allow one-party consent, but in South Carolina, you're covered." I felt something shift in my chest, like breath after drowning. "You really think I can fight this?" I asked. Lisa's voice was calm, firm. "I think you should, and I'll help you." So that was the start, the first domino. I charged my phone that night like it was a weapon, cleared space, practiced opening the recorder with a flick of my thumb. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt shaky, heavy. Because fighting back, even righteously, still felt like rebellion, like betrayal. I wasn't raised to seek revenge. I was raised to keep the peace. But maybe peace had cost me too much already. 2 days later, Jessica texted me. "Hey, can we talk, just us? I have some ideas I think you'll appreciate." I stared at that halo emoji like it was a curse. My thumb hovered over the screen, then I replied, "Sure, tomorrow after work." She sent a heart, as if we were sisters again. As if she hadn't placed a legal threat next to mashed potatoes and called it just a conversation. That night, I opened my old jewelry box one Dad gave me when I graduated high school and slipped the photo from the hallway inside. Me and Jess. One last time. Then I slid my phone into my jacket pocket, opened the voice recorder, and whispered, "Testing. 1, 2. The mic blinked red. This time, I wouldn't be silent. The next day, we met at a coffee shop just off King Street in Charleston, one of those curated, faux rustic places with Edison bulbs and drinks named after emotions. I chose the spot carefully, public enough to keep her performative, quiet enough to catch every word. I arrived 10 minutes early. Jessica arrived 15 minutes late. "Sorry," she said, air kissing the air near my cheek, had a last-minute Zoom with a new client, NBA. Actually, of course. She ordered an oat milk latte. Extra foam. I got black coffee partly because I needed the caffeine, mostly because I wanted contrast. Once we sat down, she adjusted her blazer like she was on a panel. Her phone stayed face up on the table, screen glowing with unread messages. I tapped mine. Just once. In my pocket, the voice recorder was running. "So," she started, crossing one leg over the other, "about the will." Her voice was soft, sympathetic, even. That was new. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her latte with a compostable straw. "It doesn't have to be dramatic. We can work this out like grown-ups." I didn't answer, I just nodded, like a tired therapist. Jessica leaned in. You don't really want to manage the property, right? The taxes alone would eat up your savings. I could buy you out at a generous rate. I blinked. Buy me out of our father's house. Well, it's not just about the house, it's the whole estate. The accounts, the land in Folly Beach, even the truck. I mean, she chuckled. You don't need a vintage pickup, do you? She sipped, paused, let the question hang like a trap. I looked at her and said quietly, What are you offering? That was all it took. The dam opened. Jessica launched into her pitch like a practiced agent. She had documents prepared, preliminary drafts. She called them. She said she'd consulted a few estate advisors. Though she didn't name names, she suggested a redistribution of assets. I would get a small lump sum and the furniture. She'd take the house, the accounts, the land, the truck. Plus, she added, like it was a perk, I'd take on the maintenance costs. You wouldn't have to deal with anything. It's win-win. I forced a smile. My hand curled tighter around the coffee cup. My thumb grazed the edge, hot. Grounding. The mic in my pocket picked up everything. Every smug inflection, every subtle insinuation that I was the burden. The unnecessary party in our father's legacy. I need time, I said, after she finished, to think. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. Of course, I knew you'd be reasonable. That night, I sat in bed and played the recording back 3 times. Her tone, her language, the way she framed everything as generosity, when it was clearly manipulation. I sent the file to Lisa. Her reply came within 5 minutes. This is gold. Don't respond to anything else. Let me handle the next step. But things didn't calm down. They escalated. Over the next week, Jessica texted constantly. Just checking in. Have you had a chance to review the doc? Spoke to Mom, she's on board. BTW. I ignored her. Every message made my stomach twist. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from Mom. Sarah, she said, voice strained. Jessica told me you're giving her full control of the estate. That true? I sat up straight. What? She said you agreed to it. She's got papers. She said you already signed something informal. I nearly dropped the phone. No, I said, I never signed anything. I haven't agreed to anything. A long pause, then Mom exhaled. Well, that's what I needed to know. Another silence. I'm sorry she dragged you into this, I said softly. Mom didn't answer, just said, come by tomorrow, we should talk. When I showed up the next day, I brought 2 things: the printed transcript of Jessica's offer and the gravy boat. Yes, the gravy boat. It was a ridiculous thing to carry, but it had become symbolic. That's where the envelope had landed. That's where this mess had started. Mom was in the kitchen. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept. Her hair was unbrushed. She had that empty stare she'd worn after Dad's funeral. I brought tea, I said, and something else. She sat at the table, stared at the gravy boat like it might bite her. What's this? She asked. A reminder, I said, of where Jessica decided to make her first move. Mom sighed. I didn't want to believe it. I thought she was just grieving in her own way. She's not grieving, I said quietly. She's leveraging. I slid the transcript across the table. She tried to pressure me into signing away my share. She's telling you I agreed to something I didn't, and she's planning to take control of everything. Mom read in silence. Her jaw clenched. Her fingers gripped the paper too hard, leaving creases. After a long while, she said, I always thought I raised strong girls. I thought fairness would be enough. I sat down across from her. Fairness was enough, for one of us. She nodded slowly. Do you want me to talk to her? She asked. I shook my head. No, let my lawyer do it. Mom blinked. You got a lawyer? I held her gaze. Yes, I'm done playing nice. The next morning, Jessica tried to call. I didn't pick up. Then came the email. I hear you've lawyered up. Let's not make this uglier than it has to be. Attached a polished PDF agreement, the redistribution plan, all ready to sign. My lawyer replied on my behalf. We've documented multiple attempts of coercion and misrepresentation. All further communication should go through legal counsel. That was the moment the dynamic shifted. Jessica wasn't smiling anymore. I knew she'd try something next, and she didn't disappoint. 2 days later, Lisa called me with a stunned tone. You won't believe this. Jessica contacted our firm, tried to retain someone here for estate mediation. She tried to hire your firm. Yeah, she must not know we're already advising you. Conflict of interest. The paralegal who took the call flagged it immediately. I blinked. So she just walked into the lion's den. Lisa laughed, with heels and a designer bag, classic Jessica. We both went quiet for a second. Then Lisa added, "That tells me something, though." What? She's scrambling. I sat with that thought all night. Jessica was used to winning, charming, pressuring, controlling. But now she was cornered, legally, emotionally. And I still hadn't raised my voice once. I lay in bed, hand resting on the old jewelry box beside me. Inside, the photo, the tiny reminder of who she used to be before the shine took over. I didn't want revenge. I wanted her to stop taking what wasn't hers. But maybe that's the same thing, in the end. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I sat in Lisa's office across from a glass wall overlooking downtown Atlanta. It was drizzling outside, soft gray light filtering through, casting long shadows over the polished conference table between us. In front of me were 4 neatly organized folders. "This," Lisa said, tapping the top one, "is everything we need to push back if she tries anything formal." She looked up, her tone level but eyes burning. "But I think it's time we go one step further." My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. "I'm ready." She slid another folder toward me. Inside were copies of Dad's will, annotated, handwritten notes, dates, witness signatures, ironclad. Lisa continued, "You have the recording, you have the transcript, you have the email thread, but what we really need is someone who's seen the pattern." "A witness," I said. "Exactly, someone not in the family." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing. Then, as if summoned from memory, a name came to me, Mrs. Ellery. She lived across the street from my parents for over 30 years. Widow, kept a perfect garden, always offered peppermints to trick-or-treaters and had a scary, accurate read on everyone in the neighborhood. And she'd always liked Dad. More importantly, she saw things, the kind of things no one inside the house noticed. I called her that afternoon. "Sarah." Her voice was gravelly but warm. "Good heavens, is everything okay?" I paused. Not really, but I was hoping I could come by. "I need to ask you something. Personal." The moment she opened the door, she gave me a long, knowing look. "I heard your sister's back in town," she said dryly, stepping aside. I smiled despite everything. She made an entrance. We sat in her living room, same crocheted pillows, same faded armchair from when I was 10. It smelled like cinnamon and old books. Safe. I told her what happened, the will, the offer, the lies. She listened without interrupting, hands folded, head nodding slightly. When I finished, she sighed and said, "I always wondered how long it would take." Take what? For Jessica to forget the difference between charm and character. She stood slowly, went to a small cabinet, pulled out a manila envelope. "I've kept this for years, thought it might matter one day." Inside printed photos, notes, a copy of a letter Dad once asked her to witness, a letter confirming that both daughters were to be treated equally, no amendments to be made unless he was of sound mind. He trusted me to speak up if anything ever seemed wrong, she said softly. "I think he knew how ambitious she was, how invisible you felt." I swallowed hard. "Thank you. You've always been the one who carried the quiet weight," she said. "Time someone else helped you lift it." With that, we had what we needed. Back at Lisa's office, I handed over the envelope. She grinned like she'd just been dealt an ace. "She's not going to see this coming." "No," I said, "she's too busy looking at herself." A few days later, Jessica texted again. "Can we please talk? You've made this personal." I didn't reply. Instead, Lisa sent a letter to Jessica's attorney. Yes, she'd finally hired one, probably out of panic, laying out the facts, the recording, the manipulation, the witness testimony, and our intent to pursue legal action if any further pressure was applied. The tone was polite, but it was a sword in a sheath. That same evening, Mom called. She came by, she said, cried, told me you were out to ruin her. What did you say? I told her she ruined her own chances the moment she tried to rewrite her father's love into a transaction. I closed my eyes, hand clenching around the phone. That meant more than I could say. She's not going to stop, I said. No, Mom agreed, but she's already lost. She just doesn't know it yet. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. My phone buzzed with another Jessica message. I didn't look. Instead, I pulled out the old photo again, the one I'd kept in Dad's jewelry box. That moment frozen in time, sisters in denim, smiles untainted by expectation. I traced the edge with my thumb. And then something new stirred in me, not rage, not even vindication. Clarity. Jessica had always played chess in mirrors, assuming everyone saw themselves as she did, but I'd stopped playing her game. I was writing new rules. The next morning, Lisa called. Her lawyer just folded. What? They're backing off. They know they can't win this. Not with what we have. I sat on the edge of my bed. Relief flooded my chest, but it wasn't light, it was heavy, solid, real. Lisa continued, We're drafting a formal agreement now. No changes to the will, no further contact. But here's the thing. I waited. She still thinks you forced this, that you pulled Mom into it, that you… Of course she does. I cut in. She can't imagine anyone choosing fairness over power. Lisa was quiet for a beat. Then she asked, What do you want to do now? I looked out the window. Then I smiled, for the first time in weeks. I think it's time she finds out exactly who she underestimated. The day I decided to face Jessica was the day I felt most alive and terrified at the same time. I sat in my car outside Mom's house, staring at the faded blue paint and the creaky porch steps Dad had promised to fix next summer. The same porch where Jessica once dared me to jump over the railing when we were kids, daring me to be less invisible. My fingers curled tightly around the edge of the steering wheel. The old photo of us, sisters in denim overalls, lay folded carefully in my glove compartment. I wasn't the same girl from that picture anymore, but I wanted her spirit to be with me. Inside, the air was thick. Jessica was already there, arriving early, like always. With that practiced, effortless confidence, her smile was sharp, like a knife covered in velvet. I see you got the letter, she said, eyes narrowing as she saw me step inside. I nodded. Yes, and I'm here to talk, for real. Jessica's lips curled. Finally, I was starting to think you'd run away. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the same one where the whole war began. The gravy boat sat between us like a silent judge, its glossy surface reflecting the strained light. She started with the usual, you don't understand what I've had to do, the sacrifices, the pressure. You're lucky you never had to build something from nothing. I breathed in slowly, feeling the weight of years press down on my chest. I understand plenty. I said, I understand what it means to be pushed aside. She laughed, a sound that was more bitter than amused. You mean like how you've been the good girl all your life? The safe choice. The boring one. It stung, but I kept my voice steady. Better to be boring and true than flashy and hollow. Jessica's eyes flashed. You think you're better than me? I think I'm exactly who I was meant to be. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then I stood up. I'm not here to tear you down, I said, but I won't let you tear me down either. She scoffed. You're bluffing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The little red light blinked steadily, recording everything. I have every word you've said about me, every attempt to guilt and manipulate, and you're right about one thing: I don't need your approval. I don't need you to decide my worth. Jessica's smile faltered. For the first time, I saw something raw, maybe fear, maybe doubt flicker behind her polished mask. I'm done being invisible, I added, done playing second fiddle to your ambitions. This isn't just about money, it's about respect, about recognizing that we're equals. She stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You think you've won? I shook my head. I'm just getting started. That night, I posted a photo on social media, the old denim overalls picture, the one from the hallway shelf. Caption: family isn't always perfect, but fairness is a legacy worth fighting for. Comments flooded in. Friends, strangers, people who'd faced similar battles. One message stood out from a woman named Linda, who said she'd known Dad for years and had witnessed the way Jessica had tried to isolate me. I replied, asking if she'd be willing to talk more. Days later, Linda met me at a quiet cafe. She was older, with kind eyes and a voice like warm honey. She confirmed what I'd suspected. Jessica had a pattern, not just with me, but with others in the community. She uses charm like a weapon, Linda said, and when that doesn't work, she doesn't hesitate to burn bridges. Her words settled something inside me. This wasn't just a family feud, it was a story about power, who wields it and who gets crushed by it. Meanwhile, Jessica's professional life started to unravel. I won't lie, it was hard to watch. Her clients began canceling appointments, rumors spread, people whispered about the family drama leaking into her work. A close contact in her brokerage called me, offering insider updates. Her reputation's taking a hit. You might not have to fight much longer. But I knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Jessica was relentless. She wasn't the type to give up quietly. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed a black SUV trailing me. I quickened my pace. The SUV did, too. My heart hammered as I darted into a crowded Starbucks. I ducked behind the counter, keeping an eye on the door. After a tense minute, the SUV sped away. I realized then this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about control. That night, I called Lisa. "They're watching me," I said, voice low. "Good," Lisa replied, with a hint of a smile, "means you're getting to them." She explained that Jessica's team was likely trying to intimidate me to scare me into backing down. "But," she added, "we have everything we need to stand firm." The next morning, I sat down with Mom and Lisa. "We're not just fighting for the will," I told them. "We're fighting for the truth, for Dad's legacy, for our family's dignity." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "Your father would be proud." Lisa laid out the next steps: formal mediation, public statements if needed, and ongoing legal pressure. I felt a surge of calm wash over me. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was reclaiming my voice. Jessica's world began to unravel in ways she hadn't expected. At first, it was small things: the polite but distant phone calls from clients who suddenly had to reschedule, the polite decline of invitations to networking events where she once shone like a star. I heard through the grapevine an old college friend who worked in real estate mentioned Jessica's name with a sigh. "She's having a rough patch," he said, glancing around before lowering his voice. "Words out about the family drama. You know how that goes." Jessica always played to win, but this time, the stakes were different. One evening, I received an anonymous tip. Jessica had lost a major client over rumors that her personal issues were affecting her professionalism. It wasn't just gossip. It was the community's quiet judgment, a punishment for letting private family conflicts spill into the public eye. Meanwhile, I was doing something I hadn't done in years: breathing. I started volunteering at a local nonprofit that helped families going through similar struggles. Helping others gave me strength, and little by little, I was rebuilding myself, not just as Dad's daughter, but as Sarah Whitman, the woman who refused to be invisible. But even as my life gained clarity, Jessica's desperation grew. One night, after a particularly tense day, I found myself alone in Mom's kitchen. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the countertops. Mom was washing dishes silently when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Jessica, soaked from the rain, her mascara smudged, eyes fierce but vulnerable. "I need to talk," she said, voice cracking. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where our battle had begun. Jessica confessed things I never expected: financial struggles hidden behind her polished exterior, the pressure from clients, the loneliness. "I never wanted it to come to this," she whispered. "I thought I had to fight for everything, even if it meant stepping on you." Her words hit me like a wave: bitter, honest, real. That moment didn't erase the past, but it was a turning point. Because sometimes, the most difficult battles don't end in victory or defeat, they end in understanding. Yet the fight wasn't over. Jessica's last move came as a surprise. One morning, I woke to a message from Lisa. "Jessica's lawyer just informed us she's stepping back from all claims, but there's a catch." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The catch: Jessica was demanding a public statement, an apology, and recognition of her rightful efforts. Lisa advised caution: "You don't have to give her that, but be prepared she might make it public." Jessica's next move shocked even me. Within hours, a local news outlet published an exclusive story titled, Family feud erupts over inheritance. Sister speaks out. Jessica's carefully crafted narrative painted herself as the wronged party, a hard-working woman betrayed by a jealous sibling. The story spread like wildfire, stirring sympathy and condemnation in equal measure. I sat with Mom that evening, watching the news on TV. "She's trying to rewrite history," I said quietly. Mom nodded, eyes glistening, but the truth is still here, between us, in the silence she can't touch. The media storm forced me to make a choice. Stay silent and let the story control me, or speak my truth no matter the cost. So I did what Dad taught me to stand firm, with integrity. I released my own statement, a heartfelt letter honoring Dad's legacy, calling for fairness and unity. I didn't mention Jessica by name, but the message was clear. Jessica's response: silence. Her empire began to crumble quietly. Clients disappeared, her social circle shrank, and the high-rise apartment she once flaunted felt emptier with every passing day. Yet, despite the fallout, I couldn't shake a lingering doubt. Was this really the end? Or was it just another beginning? The morning light poured softly through the window, casting long shadows across the old wooden floorboards of my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table, the faded photograph of Jessica and me still tucked carefully inside my worn jewelry box. The photo, once a symbol of innocent sisterhood, now held layers of pain, growth, and hard-earned truth. I traced the edges of the frame with my fingers, feeling the cool glass beneath my touch. The memory of that Thanksgiving dinner, the confrontation, the long battle, it all seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the echoes still hummed beneath my skin. I realized, then, how much I'd changed. Not just in the way I stood taller or spoke firmer, but deep inside. The quiet girl who once faded into the background had found her voice, not by shouting louder, but by refusing to be silenced. My phone buzzed a message from Mom. "Are you coming over for dinner? We need to talk." I smiled, knowing that family was messy, complicated, but ultimately still a place where healing could begin. That evening, Mom and I sat on her porch, wrapped in soft blankets against the cool Charleston breeze. The house was quieter now, without Jessica's booming laughter or sharp words echoing through the halls. We talked about Dad, about the legacy he wanted us to carry, not just in money or property, but in kindness, fairness, and resilience. I looked at Mom's tired eyes and whispered, "I think I finally understand what he meant about fairness." She nodded slowly. "It's not about who gets more, Sarah, it's about honoring love, even when it's hard." Jessica had faded into the background, her battles now quiet whispers in the community, the house, the accounts, the land. They were mine. Yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed something far greater: my dignity. But life doesn't reset. The scars lingered, not as wounds, but as reminders of a war fought in shadows and silence. I thought about the gravy boat, that strange symbol of how something as simple as a family meal could become a battleground. It reminded me that appearances often mask deeper struggles. That's the thing about family, sometimes the loudest battles are fought in the quietest moments. The truth is, justice is messy. It's never clean or perfect. It's tangled up in our fears, our hopes, and sometimes our failures. Jessica and I may never fully heal. Some bridges, once burned, leave ash too thick to cross. But I'm learning that freedom isn't about forgiveness or revenge. It's about choosing who you want to be, no matter the chaos around you. Before I closed the photo and put it away, I whispered a promise to myself, to Dad, and maybe, somehow, to Jessica too. I won't let this define me. I'll carry the legacy forward with strength and grace, and I'll make sure no one ever makes me feel invisible again. If you've ever felt unseen or unheard, remember your voice matters. You deserve fairness. You deserve to be seen. And just when I thought the story was over, just as I was ready to breathe, I received an unexpected call. A voice I hadn't heard in months, calm but with an edge I hadn't forgotten. "Sarah, we need to talk."